You have been feeling like you are at your limit, that you have been trying so hard for so long, and yet you remain in the same place. Maybe it's in your professional life. You give it your all, but the results simply don't show up. Or maybe it's your relationships, cycles that repeat, people who leave, promises that go unfulfilled. It could also be something more internal. Patterns you are trying to break, habits you are trying to change, versions of yourself you are trying to leave behind. But it feels like there is an invisible wall between you and the next level. And no matter how much you push, it simply doesn't give. This feeling of being stuck, of going in circles, can seem like a sign of failure. But according to Carl Jung, it is actually the opposite. When the human psyche is about to make a leap, a true transformation, what we feel beforehand is exactly that. Pressure, frustration, chaos. Jung observed that deep breakthroughs do not happen gradually. They emerge abruptly, as if the mind has been accumulating psychic energy until suddenly that energy reaches a critical mass and bursts through barriers that once seemed insurmountable. Imagine a dam holding back millions of liters of water. For months or years, the structure withstands the growing pressure. But at some point, a small crack forms, then another, until all the accumulated energy breaks through the barrier at once with uncontrollable force. This is exactly what happens inside you. Every frustrated attempt, every pain you have repressed, every no you have heard, all of this is forming psychological tension. And this tension is not a flaw, it is preparation. What Jung discovered is that the more intense the internal pressure, the closer you are to a breakthrough. And the most curious thing, these moments of rupture often come disguised as a crisis. It's when you feel like giving up, when everything seems to be falling apart, when the pain of continuing is as great as the fear of changing. And then suddenly, something inside you breaks, or rather, something inside you is set free. This video did not come to you by chance. Jung would call this synchronicity, when an external event carries such a deep symbolic meaning that it seems to have been tailor-made for your inner state. Perhaps this is the confirmation you needed. You are not broken. You are being broken open. What seemed like stagnation was, in fact, accumulation. What seemed like failure was just the process of compression before release. What you are feeling now, this exhaustion, this restlessness, this urge to explode, is not the end of the line. It is the beginning of the rupture. The wall you have been banging against for so long is about to give. Your breakthrough is not coming. It has already begun. The greatest trap of the human mind is not failure. It is the illusion that nothing is happening. When days start to feel the same, when you repeat the same behaviors, make the same mistakes, and feel the same frustrations, an almost inevitable narrative arises: I am not evolving. It is at this moment that many give up, but it is precisely here that silent transformation is at work. Carl Jung understood that the psyche does not move in a straight line. It does not evolve in a clear, visible, and measurable way. On the contrary, it works behind the curtain of consciousness, in an invisible process he called the channeling of libido, the psychic energy being continuously directed and redirected within us. When something is not working in your external life, when doors do not open, when patterns do not break, it is because your energy is still being channeled inward, to a point of accumulation that has not yet become conscious. Jung compared this to the concept of psychic entropy. When internal energy concentrates too much in one point, like an obsession, a pain, a limitation, it seems to lock the system. But this is not failure, it is focus. The unconscious is gathering strength, preparing the ground, concentrating everything that needs to be broken all at once. And that is why so many of us feel stuck, even when we are doing everything right. Progress is happening, but not in the way we have been conditioned to recognize. This is the great illusion of stagnation, to believe that because we do not see immediate external changes, there is no growth. But real growth begins underground. The seed must die beneath the earth before it can be born to the surface. And like nature, the psyche respects cycles that are invisible to the hurried eye. While you struggle against this invisible wall, professional, emotional, spiritual, the unconscious works to create a creative collapse, a moment of rupture that will reorganize everything in a new way. But this only happens when the tension reaches its limit. And here is an essential point. Pain, boredom, the feeling of inadequacy and being broken are signs that your psyche is approaching transformation. What seems to be failure may actually be the maturation of your next leap. It is not that you are not evolving, you are evolving within. And this is almost always a solitary, confusing, and slow process. Jung taught that it is in these moments of silence, emptiness, darkness, that the self begins to move. Not the ego, which wants immediate answers, but the deeper instance of your identity. When the ego is tired, surrendered, not knowing what else to do, the self can finally act. And that is when everything changes. But before the explosion comes the collapse. Before rebirth comes chaos. And that is what we will talk about next. The moment before the explosion, when everything seems to be crumbling, but in reality, it is just reorganizing. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Almost no one tells you this, but the darkest moments of your life, those when everything seems to collapse, when nothing makes sense anymore, when every step feels heavy and directionless, are often the exact moments that precede an extraordinary breakthrough. Not by chance, Carl Jung observed that psychological chaos, when it reaches its maximum intensity, often precedes a profound reorganization of the psyche. He believed that when internal pressure becomes unbearable, something old must die for something new to be born. It is not a metaphor, it is real transformation. This moment of emotional, mental, and even physical collapse can manifest in various ways. Existential crises, persistent insomnia, anxiety attacks, a void that silently consumes the will to live, or an overwhelming sense of being completely lost. It is when the pillars that supported your identity begin to crumble. And as desperate as it may seem, this collapse is not a mistake. It is a sign that the structure of your old self is no longer capable of containing the new consciousness that is trying to emerge. Jung called this the conflict between the ego and the self. The ego, the part of you that identifies with what is known, familiar, predictable, struggles to maintain control. It clings to the past, to old roles, to fragile certainties. But the self, the deepest and truest core of your psyche, wants expansion. And to expand, it needs to break through boundaries. The tension between these two psychological centers intensifies until one of them gives way. And the ego inevitably breaks. Society interprets this moment as collapse, nervous breakdown, burnout, depression. But for depth psychology, what is happening is a structural realignment of the soul. Something within you is being deconstructed to make way for what you are not yet, but are about to become. The pain you feel is the friction between the old that resists and the new that insists. Think of the butterfly's cocoon. From the outside, it seems just like a strange immobility, an abandonment of form. But inside, a total disintegration of the caterpillar occurs. It literally dissolves before reorganizing into something completely different. This is what happens to you in those moments of deep transition. You feel lost because the old you is being undone. And this is necessary. Jung said that the psyche cannot endure tensions indefinitely. Eventually, something gives way. The resistance that once served to keep your mental structure stable begins to fail. defenses fall, the unconscious erupts, and with it come contents you have avoided for years, fears, truths, traumas, desires, revelations. All of this may seem like a collapse, but in reality, it is the beginning of an internal revolution. That is why often the darkest moment of the night is the prelude to dawn. The pressure you feel today may be exactly what is pushing you out of the prison you built for yourself. The question is, will you resist until you break, or will you allow the rupture to happen with awareness? Because, as we will see next, the real breakthrough, the true explosion of transformation, is not a smooth process. It does not negotiate with comfort. It destroys everything that is no longer compatible with who you are destined to be. And when it arrives, nothing remains the same. In the next chapter, we will explore exactly this: why real breakthroughs do not evolve, they erupt. There is a misguided and extremely comfortable blind belief that major life changes happen as a smooth, linear, predictable process. People like to imagine growth as a staircase, one step at a time, steady progress, small victories that accumulate until the top. But this is a comforting illusion invented by the ego. In the deep reality of the psyche, true transformations do not follow this logic. They do not develop gradually. They erupt. They break. They tear you apart from the inside until nothing remains of what you thought you were. This is rupture, and this is what Jung understood better than anyone else. Carl Jung argued that the psyche operates through qualitative leaps, not linear progressions. In his work, The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, he details how psychic energy accumulates silently, channeled by experiences, frustrations, repressed desires, ignored symbols, until this accumulation becomes unsustainable. The unconscious, pressured, begins to create cracks in the ego. And when the ego can no longer sustain the tension between what is and what needs to be, it collapses. And from the collapse, the new is born. This process is not beautiful. It is not inspiring at first. It is brutal, because the breakthrough does not ask for permission. It happens like an internal earthquake. Suddenly, everything that made sense loses its meaning. Certainties crumble, relationships change, identity dissolves, and what remains is a terrifying, but also fertile, emptiness. A clean field where something authentic can finally bloom. Jung observed this in his patients frequently. Many of them reported that the most painful moments of their lives, losses, bankruptcies, separations, illnesses, panic crises, were followed by periods of intense spiritual expansion, clarity of purpose, and a sense of rebirth. But rebirth only came after destruction, because breakthroughs, by definition, do not add something to what you already are. They replace what you were with a more real, wilder, more whole version. It is important to understand that this rupture is not chaotic by chance. It is necessary, because if the ego had a choice, it would keep everything exactly as it is. The ego wants predictability, recognition, control. But the self wants wholeness. And wholeness demands confrontation with the parts that the ego has learned to reject. The shadow, traumas, repressed impulses, unconfessed desires, deepest fears. The breakthrough is, therefore, the eruption of the unconscious demanding integration. And here lies the hidden beauty in chaos. The rupture does not destroy you. It destroys the prison where you were. It tears down the walls that kept you small, controlled, domesticated. Jung said that there is no awareness without pain, because seeing who you really are also means seeing everything you have avoided being. So, if your life seems to be crumbling, if everything you knew is falling apart, know this: you are not being punished, you are being rebuilt. What is crumbling is not you. It is the illusion you built about yourself. And what comes after that is freedom. But this freedom comes at a price, the crossing of resistance. Because the ego does not give up easily. It will fight with everything it has to preserve what is known. And this is what we will talk about next. Why the resistance you feel today may be the final test before your liberation. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. And in gratitude for reaching 500,000 subscribers, all ebooks will be 15% off until the end of the month. Apply the code PSY500. When you are one step away from transformation, it is precisely at that moment that resistance becomes most intense. It seems like a cruel irony, but it is not. Jung saw this phenomenon clearly. He believed that the greatest advances of the psyche are always preceded by a surge of obstacles, both internal and external. The resistance you feel now, whether in the form of fatigue, discouragement, self-sabotage, or recurring crises, is not trying to stop you. It is testing you. And more than that, it is preparing you. Resistance is the ego's defense mechanism. It appears because you are threatening the current structure of your identity. And the ego does not want to change. It prefers a comfortable prison to an unknown freedom. Every time you try to break a pattern, create a new reality, or abandon an old narrative about yourself, the ego responds with fear, doubt, and sabotage. This is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that you are shaking the foundation. How many times have you tried to change a habit, a relationship, a life path? And just when it seemed you were going to succeed, something pulled you back. This does not happen because you are incapable. It happens because real change is a threat to the established internal order. And the ego, as a guardian, will use all possible resources to maintain the status quo. Procrastination, distraction, emotional crises, even psychosomatic illnesses. All to avoid the inevitable, the break with who you used to be. But Jung reminds us of something fundamental. This resistance is part of the process. It is not an enemy, it is fuel. It is the pressure that will generate the necessary force to break through the wall. If there were no resistance, there would be no accumulation of energy. If there were no accumulation, there would be no rupture. And if there were no rupture, there would be no rebirth. Therefore, the pain you feel now is not punishment, it is evolutionary friction. It is a sign that you are exactly where you need to be, at the threshold between the old and the new. Jung described this point of maximum tension as the critical stage of individuation, the process by which a human being stops living under masks, conditioning, and imposed identities, and begins to integrate all parts of the psyche, including the darkest ones. This is only possible when resistance reaches its peak, because it is at this height of conflict that the ego finally surrenders. It realizes that it cannot defeat the self. And in this act of surrender, transformation occurs. You can interpret resistance as an enemy, or you can face it as the final master on your path. It is there to test how much you really want to break free. It asks, are you willing to let die the version of yourself that no longer serves you? Because if the answer is yes, then you need to go through the pain, the fear, the doubt, not circumvent them. The crossing is the only way out. And the more intense the resistance, the greater the potential for the breakthrough that is about to emerge. Therefore, instead of retreating, move closer. Observe your patterns. Feel the energy that moves behind the chaos. Because on the other side of this last barrier is a force that you may have never accessed before. And it is precisely about this force that we will talk next. The psychic energy that is boiling within you, about to explode towards your new reality. If everything you've heard so far makes sense, then you are probably at this very point. The pressure has reached its limit. The wall is starting to crack, and something inside you can no longer accept living as before. But here comes the big question: what to do now? How to act when you are in the eye of the emotional hurricane? How to get through this moment without being destroyed by it? Carl Jung left valuable clues. He believed that when the unconscious is active and psychic energy is boiling, one should not try to suppress or rationalize the process. On the contrary, one must collaborate with it. The rational mind must stop resisting and start listening. The ego needs to become a channel, not a barrier. Here are practical and profoundly transformative actions you can apply from now on to navigate this phase with awareness and allow the breakthrough to materialize. 1. Stop fighting against the chaos. Start observing it. Your pain, your frustration, your intense emotions, they are all telling you something. Jung called this the messages of the unconscious. Instead of fleeing or repressing what you feel, sit in silence, close your eyes, and ask, what does this want to show me? Treat your emotional symptoms as symbols, not as problems to be solved. Discomfort is the symbolic language of the soul. Listen. 2. Write, without censorship, everything that is going through your mind. The simple act of putting your darkest, most confusing and contradictory thoughts on paper works as a release valve for psychic energy. Jung used the method of active imagination, a technique where you freely write or draw the contents that emerge from the unconscious. Do this daily. Don't worry about coherence. The goal is not immediate clarity, it is expression. 3. Get out of automatic mode. Consciously break the cycle. Observe the patterns you are repeating, the conversations that always end the same way, the habits you know sabotage you, the thoughts that weaken you. Identify one of them, just one, and change it. It could be getting up 30 minutes earlier, not responding to that message that always traps you in the cycle, or saying no where you used to say yes. A conscious act of rupture creates an opening in the unconscious. 4. Avoid distractions and emotional anesthetics. When we are on the verge of a breakthrough, the tendency is to want to escape, diving into social media, addictions, food, sex, compulsive work. But this escape only prolongs the process. You don't need to accelerate the collapse, but you need to be present for it. Create moments of silence, solitude, and real introspection. Make space for what needs to emerge to come to the surface. 5. Cultivate courage, not optimism. This is not the time to try to think positive. It is the time to be brutally honest with yourself. Look at your shadows, face your fears, acknowledge your weaknesses. This does not weaken you. It liberates you. The courage Jung proposed is not the absence of fear. It is action in the face of it. 6. Seek symbolic support. Read authors who expand your worldview. Immerse yourself in myths, in works that address the human journey. Jung believed that archetypal narratives help us understand our moment. You are going through a dark night of the soul, a stage present in all great mythologies. You are not alone. The history of humanity is filled with people who have already traversed this path. Use their stories as maps. 7. And, if necessary, seek a Jungian therapist. Sometimes the unconscious brings forth content so dense that we need someone prepared to accompany us on this journey. A good therapist will not give you ready-made answers. They will help you find yours, within yourself. Jung said that the analyst is like a mirror that reflects parts of us that we are still unable to see alone. The point is, don't wait to feel ready to act. The rupture has already begun. And like a dam that bursts, you now have two choices. Let the current drag you, or learn to swim with it. Deep down, the pain you feel is not fear of the unknown. It is fear of losing the known. But this known no longer serves you. It is too narrow for your soul. And that is why, in the next and final part, we will explore exactly what is on the other side of this rupture. The new identity that is about to emerge. Because the breakthrough is not the end of the struggle. It is the beginning of a new life. If you have made it this far, it is because some part of you recognizes that it can no longer continue the same way. Something has changed, even if you cannot name it. And perhaps, for the first time, you are realizing that what you called failure, stagnation, or collapse was in fact a hidden process of transformation, a preparation, an invisible crossing that is now impossible to ignore. There will be no warning, no siren will sound. A voice from the sky will not say, "Now is the time." Because this transformation does not happen in a magical instant. It begins quietly, imperceptibly, like a subtle crack in the wall of your old identity. And gradually, this crack expands until the entire structure can no longer hold itself up, and it collapses. But this collapse, which the ego interprets as an end, is actually a beginning. It is when you stop sustaining the character you built to survive. It is when you abandon the stories you have told yourself for years. It is when you look in the mirror and no longer recognize who you used to be. And instead of fleeing, you accept. Because you realize that only then can something new be born. Jung called this moment integration. It is when the rejected parts of the psyche, the shadow, the traumas, the desires, the forgotten potentials, cease to be enemies and become allies, when you stop fighting against yourself. And for the first time, you feel a strange peace, because you are whole, not perfect. Whole. And it is here that everything changes, not because the external world changes, but because you change the way you position yourself in front of it. You stop being reactive, automatic, a hostage to circumstances, and begin to act from a new center, a deeper center, more aligned, a center that no longer seeks validation, but truth. This does not mean there will be no pain, that you won't fall, doubt, retreat. You will. But now you know what is happening. Now you know you are not regressing. You are reconstructing yourself. That resistance is just another step, that the crisis is the portal, that the anguish is proof that you are alive and in motion. And above all, now you know you are not alone, because thousands of people are living exactly the same process. They may not know how to name it. They may think they are going crazy, but they are awakening. And if this video found you today, it is because your soul recognized this call, because it knows that the time for rupture has come, and that there is no going back. So, take a deep breath, feel the ground beneath your feet. You don't need to understand everything now. You just need to accept that what needs to fall will fall, and what is trying to be born needs space. What comes next? You. The version of yourself that is not an adaptation, but an authentic expression of what you truly are, and it has already begun to emerge.